She told me this story years after it happened, and even now when I think about it I feel my stomach knotting. You know how some stories sound too insane to believe, but the way the person tells it, the way their voice shakes and their eyes drift off like they're watching it all play again in their head, you just know it's true? That's how this felt. Her name was Lydia. She was a young mother, maybe 29 at the time, traveling with her 4-year-old daughter, Amara. They weren't rich, not at all. In fact, she told me the flight was a stretch for her. It was the cheapest ticket she could find to get them from one city to another. She had family waiting, a sister who promised to help her get back on her feet. The plane was one of those mid-sized ones, 2 seats on the left, 2 on the right. Lydia and Amara sat by the window, near the back, surrounded by strangers who looked tired, quiet, and uninterested. Lydia remembered the man across the aisle, a heavy-set guy in a suit who kept loosening his tie like he couldn't breathe. She remembered the young woman in front of her who had earbuds in the whole time, nodding along to music only she could hear. And she remembered, most of all, the man a few rows ahead with silver hair, reading a newspaper. She didn't know it then, but that man would change everything. The flight started normal. The safety announcements, the pushback, the long slow crawl to the runway. Amara was restless, kicking her feet against the seat, asking questions in that loud, innocent voice that makes other passengers sigh. Lydia tried to calm her, whispering promises of snacks once they were in the air. When the plane lifted off, Lydia said she actually felt relief. That temporary freedom, like you're above all your problems for a little while. She pressed her head to the window and watched the city lights fade into darkness below. But the peace didn't last. She said the first sign was the turbulence. At first, it was gentle, like the bumps you expect. But then it grew harder, rocking the plane enough to make overhead bins rattle. People started exchanging nervous looks. Flight attendants strapped themselves in, whispering to each other with tight jaws. Then came the sound. She struggled to describe it. It wasn't a bang, it wasn't an explosion. She called it a deep tearing, like the plane itself was groaning, ripping apart from the inside. The oxygen masks dropped. The cabin tilted. People screamed. The pilot's voice cracked through the intercom, fast and panicked. Brace! Brace! We are, before it cut off in static. Lydia's arms shot around Amara. She said the world shrunk to just that moment. Her little girl's terrified face, the tiny fingers digging into her sleeve, the thoughts slamming into her head over and over, we're not going to make it. She's not going to make it. And then, in the chaos, came the impossible choice. The emergency exit near the back had been flung open by a man in pure panic, trying to jump out before the crash. People were shouting at him, trying to stop him, but the wind screamed in and everything loose went flying. Lydia was only a few seats away. She swears she doesn't even remember deciding. She just remembers holding Amara tight, kissing her hair and whispering, "I'm sorry, baby." Then she pushed her child out into the night. She collapsed into the seat after that, sobbing, sure she'd just killed her daughter. But something inside her had screamed that it was the only chance. That outside there was at least sky. Inside the plane there was only fire waiting. What happened next is what makes this story not just horrifying but unreal. Because Amara didn't fall to her death. Someone, or something, caught her. Lydia said the last glimpse she had of Amara was her tiny body swallowed up by the black sky. She thought she'd never see her again. She thought she'd thrown her child into certain death. People around her were screaming, grabbing onto seats, praying while she sat frozen, empty, like her soul had already left her body. But then something happened, something Lydia only learned about later when she heard Amara tell the story in her own words. Amara remembered it as falling, fast and hard, the wind rushing past her ears so loud she couldn't even scream. She thought she was dreaming, the world spinning around her, stars and city lights blurring together below. And then out of the black came wings. Not the kind of wings you'd picture from a fairy tale, soft and glowing. No, these were massive, rough and terrifying. She said the bird was so big she thought it was a monster at first. Talons wrapped around her clothes, holding her tight, pulling her upward in a jerk so strong it knocked the breath out of her. An eagle. Not just any eagle. It was a bird so large, so impossibly strong, it could carry her weight like she was nothing. And it wasn't alone. It circled back toward a small private jet flying a little distance from the doomed passenger plane. A jet owned by a man few people on board had recognized earlier, a billionaire named Charles Whitmore. He was the silver-haired man Lydia had noticed in the aisle, reading the newspaper. Except what she didn't know then was that Whitmore wasn't just rich, he was eccentric. Obsessed with rare animals, power, and control. He traveled with his eagle, a massive bird he'd raised since birth. It wasn't supposed to be on the flight, but Whitmore had connections. Rules didn't apply to him. The eagle carried Amara toward the jet where the crew, shocked out of their minds, pulled her in. She was crying, terrified but alive. Whitmore himself was there, arms outstretched, helping to bring her inside. He looked at her with disbelief first, then a kind of dark amusement. Like fate had just handed him something he didn't know he wanted. Meanwhile, back in the passenger plane, Lydia felt the descent sharpen. The plane shook so violently she couldn't lift her head. People were bleeding, bruised, some already unconscious from the pressure. She thought about Amara, praying her little girl had died instantly, quick and painless, because the alternative was too much to bear. But Amara wasn't gone. She was strapped into a leather seat inside a billionaire's jet, shivering, staring at the strange man with a kind smile that didn't reach his eyes. And here's where the story begins to twist. Because Whitmore didn't return her right away. He didn't call the authorities the second they landed. No, he kept her. He called her lucky, told his staff the eagle had chosen her, and from that night on, Amara's life took a turn Lydia could never have imagined. When the plane finally went down, Lydia didn't remember the impact itself. 1 second she was gripping the armrest so hard her nails broke. The next, everything went white. The sound, the fear, even the screams around her, gone. She woke up hours later in a hospital bed, her body covered in bruises, her ribs aching with every shallow breath. The nurses said she was one of the few who made it out alive. Out of nearly 200 passengers, fewer than 30 survived. Most of them were in critical condition. Lydia should have felt grateful. But all she could think about was Amara. At first, she couldn't bring herself to admit what she'd done. She told the rescue workers that her daughter hadn't been on board, that Amara was with relatives. She couldn't bring herself to say she had thrown her child out of a falling plane. Who would believe her? They would call her insane. Worse, they'd say she was a murderer. But the guilt ate her alive. Every hour that passed made it harder to breathe. She replayed the moment in her head over and over, the way Amara's small hands had clutched her, the way her body had vanished into the storm. Lydia couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She told herself her daughter was gone, and she deserved the weight of that knowledge forever. Then, 2 weeks after the crash, she saw something on the news that made her heart stop. The headline scrolled across the TV in the hospital lobby: Billionaire Charles Whitmore rescues child in midair mystery. There she was, Amara. Her face, pale and confused, staring into a camera as she clutched a blanket too big for her small frame. Lydia almost collapsed. The world thought Whitmore was a hero, a man whose prized eagle had performed a miraculous rescue. He'd spun the story perfectly, making himself look larger than life, like fate had chosen him to be in the right place at the right time. But Lydia knew better. She knew what Whitmore was capable of, because she saw the look in his eyes on that TV screen. He wasn't proud. He wasn't relieved. He looked possessive. Like Amara wasn't a child he had saved. She was a prize. Lydia begged the hospital staff to get her a phone. She tried calling, reaching out, demanding someone put her in touch with the authorities. But every time she mentioned her daughter, the words tangled. How could she explain she had thrown her child out of a plane? Who would listen to that? By the time she was discharged, Whitmore had already tightened his grip. His lawyers were everywhere, painting him as a savior, dismissing anyone who questioned his story. Amara appeared again on the news, sitting silently beside him during a press conference. She didn't speak. She just kept her head down, clutching a stuffed toy Whitmore's staff must have given her. Lydia realized with a gut-deep dread that her fight wasn't over. She had survived a plane crash. But now she was going to have to survive something worse. A battle against one of the most powerful men in the world to get her daughter back. And she had no idea what kind of life Amara was living inside his walls. Amara told this part years later, when she was old enough to put the memories into words. At the time she was only 7, too young to understand the way power and control worked. Too young to see Whitmore for who he truly was. The mansion was unlike anything she had ever seen. A house so big it felt like a castle, with glass walls that looked out over the ocean, chandeliers hanging from ceilings so high they disappeared into shadows, and hallways that never seemed to end. The first night she arrived, she thought she was dreaming. Servants gave her warm food, soft clothes, a bed with sheets that smelled like lavender. But she didn't sleep. She couldn't. Whitmore visited her the next morning. He didn't talk to her like an adult talks to a child. He talked to her like she was his possession, his new discovery. He told her she was chosen, that fate had put her in his care for a reason. He never mentioned her mother. He never mentioned the plane. The eagle was there too. A massive, silent creature, perched on a stand in his study. Whitmore called it valor. Its golden eyes followed Amara everywhere she went, unblinking. She hated the sound of its wings beating the air when Whitmore summoned it, hated the way he stroked its feathers like it was more than just a bird. Sometimes she swore he whispered to it words she couldn't hear. At first the staff were kind. They gave her toys, cooked her favorite meals, tried to make her smile. But even at 7 she could feel it, that sense of fear in their eyes. They didn't dare cross Whitmore. They didn't dare treat her like she wasn't his. The strange part was Whitmore didn't lock her in a room. He didn't need to. He let her wander the mansion, let her explore the sprawling gardens, even let her sit in the library with books stacked higher than she could reach. But she wasn't free. Every time she thought of leaving, the eagle appeared, watching her from a branch or a rooftop. And Whitmore always seemed to know what she was thinking before she acted. One night, Amara asked him directly. She asked, "When can I see my mom?" Whitmore smiled. Not kindly, but in that cold, distant way that made her shiver. He crouched down to her level and said, "Your mother isn't here anymore. You're mine now. The world gave you to me and I don't give back what's mine." Amara cried that night until her throat burned. But the sound was swallowed by the size of the house, fading into silence like it had never happened. Meanwhile, Lydia was out there, alive, clawing her way through hospitals, police stations and newsrooms, desperate to reach her daughter. But Amara didn't know that. All she knew was that she was a child inside a palace that felt more like a cage, guarded not by walls or locks, but by a man and his eagle. And that was only the beginning. Because Whitmore didn't just want to keep her. He had plans. Plans that would turn the miracle of her survival into something much darker. Lydia didn't have money. She didn't have influence. All she had was the truth: her daughter had survived. She had seen Amara's face on that TV screen, sitting next to Whitmore, looking smaller than she ever had before. That truth burned in her chest like fire, and it gave her the strength to keep moving even when the odds felt impossible. Her first step was the police. She walked into a station with the newspaper clutched in her hand, pointed to her daughter's picture, and told them everything. She left out one detail, the part about throwing Amara from the plane. Instead, she said Amara must have fallen during the chaos, and somehow Whitmore's eagle had caught her. Even then, the officers looked at her like she was losing her mind. One officer leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "Ma'am, that man is one of the most respected names in this city. He saved a child. He's being honored for it next week. Are you really asking me to believe he stole your daughter?" She slammed her fist on his desk, her voice cracking. "I don't care what he looks like to you. That little girl is mine. And if you don't help me, I'll find someone who will." But no one did. Lawyers turned her away, journalists avoided her calls, even some of the other survivors whispered about her in pity, as if grief had driven her insane. Lydia realized then that Whitmore wasn't just rich. He was untouchable. His money had built walls higher than any prison, walls that even the law couldn't climb. So she started watching, following his movements. She found out where he lived, a sprawling estate on the cliffs outside the city. She couldn't get close, guards patrolled the gates, cameras watched every corner, but she could see enough from a distance to know Amara was still there. Sometimes, just before dusk, she caught a glimpse of her daughter on the balcony, hair tangled in the wind, standing so still it broke Lydia's heart. One evening, Lydia gathered enough courage to approach the gate. She shouted for Amara, her voice echoing off the iron bars, raw with desperation. She saw movement on the balcony. Amara turned her head and for a split second their eyes met. But then Whitmore appeared behind her. He rested a hand on Amara's shoulder, and even from that distance, Lydia could see the way her daughter flinched. Then he leaned close, whispering something in her ear before guiding her back inside. The guards came down moments later, warning Lydia that if she didn't leave, she'd be arrested for trespassing. That night, sitting in her car parked down the hill, Lydia realized something chilling. Whitmore wasn't just keeping Amara. He was reshaping her, training her, turning her into something Lydia might not recognize by the time she got her back. And for the first time since the crash, Lydia asked herself a terrifying question. What if Amara didn't want to come back anymore? Amara was still just a child, but even at her age she could feel something wasn't right. The mansion wasn't a home, it was a stage, and she was being taught how to play a role. Whitmore didn't yell, didn't lock her away, but his control was sharper than chains. He gave her everything she could want: books, clothes, even lessons with private tutors. But there were rules. Always rules. She had to eat meals at his table, never in her room. She had to answer when he called, no matter what she was doing. And most importantly, she was never to mention her mother. If she said Lydia's name, the room went cold. Whitmore would smile, that thin smile that never reached his eyes, and say, "The past is gone, Amara. You live here now. With me. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering her mother's name under her breath just so she wouldn't forget how it sounded. But she was afraid Valor, the eagle, would hear. Sometimes she swore it perched outside her window, staring in at her, its golden eyes glowing in the dark. Meanwhile, Lydia was falling apart. Every door she knocked on slammed shut. No lawyer would take her case. No reporter would risk writing about Whitmore. She tried shouting outside the mansion again, but this time the guards pushed her so hard she hit the gravel and tore her palms. She realized screaming wouldn't work. She needed evidence. So she watched. She parked her car down the road at night, binoculars in her lap, staring at the mansion's glowing windows. She kept notes, writing down when Amara appeared on the balcony, when Whitmore's car left, when the eagle circled overhead. It became her obsession. Every breath she took was for one purpose: find a way back to her daughter. One night, Lydia wasn't the only one watching. She felt it before she saw it, someone's eyes on her. A figure approached the car, moving carefully in the dark. She almost screamed until she saw the man's face illuminated by the dashboard light. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, but his eyes were sharp. "Are you watching Whitmore too?" he asked quietly. Lydia's heart raced. She didn't answer at first, but the man leaned against her car, lowering his voice. "Don't worry. I'm not with him. My name's Daniel. I used to work for him." She blinked, stunned. "Work for him? What do you mean?" Daniel looked over his shoulder, making sure no one was listening. Then he said words that made her blood run cold. "He doesn't save people. He collects them." Lydia realized then she wasn't crazy. She wasn't alone. Someone else knew the truth. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it was going to get. Daniel's voice was low, but every word carried weight. Lydia sat frozen in her car seat, her fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. She wanted to believe him, but something in his tired eyes told her this wasn't a lie. He used to work for Whitmore. Not as a bodyguard, not as a servant, something in between. A man hired to keep the billionaire's secrets buried. And what he told Lydia made her stomach turn. Whitmore wasn't obsessed with money. He already had more than he could ever spend. His real obsession was control. Over people, over nature, over fate itself. That was why he kept the eagle. It wasn't just a pet, it was a symbol, proof that he could take something wild and bend it to his will. And people weren't any different to him. Daniel said he'd seen it before. Young people, orphans, runaways, even children from disasters, somehow ended up in Whitmore's care. Not many, not enough to draw headlines, but enough that Daniel had noticed the pattern. They'd appear in his mansion, live there for a while, and then disappear. No one asked questions. No one could. Whitmore had lawyers, politicians, even law enforcement wrapped around his finger. What happens to them? Lydia whispered, afraid to hear the answer. Daniel looked away. "I don't know. Some get sent overseas under new names. Some don't leave at all." Her chest tightened. "And my daughter?" Daniel met her eyes then, steady and grim. "If he says she's his, he won't give her up. Not willingly. He'll twist her mind until she believes it herself." Lydia felt sick. She thought of Amara on that balcony, standing so still, the way she had flinched under his touch. She thought of her daughter whispering her name at night, clinging to the memory of her mother while Whitmore worked to erase it. Daniel leaned closer. "If you want to get her out, you can't go through the law. You can't go through the press. You'll have to go through him." Lydia almost laughed, but it came out hollow. "Do you know who you're talking about? He's untouchable." Daniel shook his head. "No one's untouchable. You just have to find where they bleed." Those words stuck in Lydia's mind long after he walked away into the dark. She didn't know whether to trust him, whether he was another trap set by Whitmore himself. But she did know one thing: if she sat back and waited, she'd lose Amara forever. Back inside the mansion, Amara was beginning to feel it too, the slow erosion of her memories. Whitmore filled her days with lessons, with talks about power, with stories about how the world was cruel and only people like him could protect her. He praised her when she obeyed, when she stayed silent about her past. And little by little, Amara felt the edges of her mother's face fading in her mind. Sometimes she wondered if maybe Whitmore was right. Maybe the past really was gone. Maybe she belonged here. And that was what scared Lydia most when she thought of her daughter, that one day Amara might believe it. Lydia didn't sleep for days after meeting Daniel. She kept replaying his words in her mind. "You'll have to go through him." It sounded impossible, reckless, maybe even suicidal. But what other choice did she have? If she sat back and waited for the system to work, Amara would disappear into Whitmore's world completely. Daniel met her again a week later at a small cafe outside the city, a place so quiet it felt like it had been forgotten by time. He brought folders, photographs, scraps of information he'd collected during his years working for Whitmore. It wasn't much, but it was enough to paint a picture. Offshore accounts. Property under shell companies. Lawsuits buried with hush money. Connections to politicians and police chiefs. It was a spider's web, and Whitmore sat in the center. Lydia stared at the files until the words blurred. "How do you fight something like this?" she asked. Daniel stirred his coffee, his jaw tightening. "You don't fight him with the law. You fight him with what he fears: exposure. Men like Whitmore can only control the story as long as no one knows the truth. If you can show the world what he really is, his empire will crack." But how? She didn't even have a picture of Amara in his house. Nothing to prove her daughter was there against her will. Daniel leaned in, his voice low. "The only way to get proof is from inside." The words hit her like a weight. Inside. That meant breaking into a fortress guarded by men with guns, cameras that never blinked, and an eagle that seemed to see everything. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Amara was starting to notice the little things Whitmore couldn't hide. She noticed how the staff avoided looking her in the eye, how their smiles were forced, how their hands shook when they served Whitmore his wine. She noticed how Valor, the eagle, sometimes snapped at them when Whitmore wasn't in the room, its talons scraping the floor. One afternoon she wandered into a hallway she wasn't supposed to enter. The door at the end was locked, but voices came from behind it, soft, scared voices. She pressed her ear against the wood and froze. Children. Whispering. Before she could listen longer, Whitmore's hand landed on her shoulder. She jumped, spinning to see him standing there, his smile tight. He guided her away without a word, but later that night, he reminded her of the rule: some doors are not for you. Amara lay in bed trembling. She couldn't shake the sound of those whispers. If Whitmore had other children hidden in the house, what did that mean for her? And on the outside, Lydia was starting to wonder the same thing. Daniel hinted at rumors: children who never came back, families who had been silenced. The thought made Lydia's stomach twist. It wasn't just about saving Amara anymore. If she didn't stop Whitmore, how many others would vanish behind his gates? For the first time since the crash, Lydia felt something stronger than fear. It was fury. The night was heavy with fog when Lydia and Daniel parked their car a mile from the mansion. They moved on foot, keeping low through the trees, their hearts pounding with every rustle of leaves. Lydia wasn't trained for this. She wasn't a spy, wasn't a fighter. She was a mother, and all she had was the kind of determination that grows when you've got nothing left to lose. Daniel had mapped out blind spots in the cameras, places where the guards' routines overlapped just enough to slip through. But Valor was the real problem. The eagle. Even at night, its eyes cut through the dark like headlights. Daniel said it could spot a rabbit from 2 miles away. What chance did they have sneaking past that? Lydia tried to steady her breathing. "I have to get her back. Whatever it takes." Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Amara's curiosity had reached its breaking point. That locked hallway had haunted her for days. She waited until the house was quiet, until Whitmore was distracted in his study, and then she crept back. She carried a hairpin one of the maids had left behind. Her hands shook as she pushed it into the lock, fumbling until she heard the click. The door opened onto a narrow stairwell that led underground. The air was damp and cold, and the sound of whispers grew louder. She followed them, her bare feet silent on the stone steps. At the bottom, she found a row of rooms with barred windows. Inside, children huddled on thin mattresses, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. Some were younger than her, some older, but all of them looked broken. When they saw her, they rushed to the bars, whispering frantically, "Help us. Please get us out. He says we belong to him." Amara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. She wanted to scream, to run, but before she could, a shadow fell across the hall. Whitmore. He didn't yell. He didn't even look surprised. He simply stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on Valor's feathers as the eagle perched on his arm. His voice was calm but colder than she'd ever heard it. "I told you, Amara. Some doors are not for you." She backed away, shaking. "Why are they here? Why can't they leave?" Whitmore smiled, the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "Because the world wastes them. Just like it wasted you. I save what others throw away." He leaned closer, his eyes sharp. "And soon you'll understand why that makes you special." Back outside, Lydia and Daniel had just reached the outer wall when they saw movement overhead. Wings. Massive, dark wings cutting through the fog. Valor. The eagle circled once, twice before letting out a scream that split the night. Daniel cursed under his breath. He knows we're here. Lydia's chest tightened. Somewhere beyond those walls, Amara was in danger. And now Whitmore's eyes were turning toward her too. The alarms cut through the night like knives. Lydia and Daniel sprinted across the grounds, their bodies pressed low, but it was too late. Guards were pouring out of the mansion, flashlights slicing through the fog. And above them Valor circled, its screeches guiding the men below. Daniel grabbed Lydia's arm. We can't fight them head-on. We need to get to her before they close us in. Her chest burned, her lungs screaming, but she didn't stop. Somewhere in that house, Amara was trapped. That was all that mattered. Inside, Whitmore dragged Amara back up from the basement, his hand clamped tight around her wrist. The children below had gone silent the second his shadow fell across them, their fear drilled too deep to resist. He led her into the grand hall, where the chandeliers glowed and the walls seemed to stretch endlessly. His voice echoed off the marble. Do you see now, Amara? The world throws people away and I keep them. I make them mine. Just like I made you mine. Tears blurred her vision, but she held his gaze. I'm not yours. My mom will come for me. Whitmore chuckled softly, bending closer. Your mother is nothing. She can't even touch me. He leaned in so close she could feel his breath. She threw you away, Amara. And I caught you. Those words sliced through her, but before he could say more, the front doors burst open. Lydia stumbled in, Daniel at her side, both out of breath, their clothes torn from the struggle outside. Amara. Lydia's voice cracked, desperate. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt alive. She tore free from Whitmore's grip and ran toward her mother. Lydia dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around her daughter so tight she thought she might never let go. Whitmore didn't shout. He didn't rush forward. He simply raised his hand. Valor swooped down from the balcony above, its wings beating the air like thunder. The eagle's talons stretched toward them, a predator's strike. Daniel pulled a knife from his belt and slashed upward as Valor dove. The blade caught its wing, sending the bird shrieking, feathers scattering across the marble floor. For the first time Whitmore's calm mask cracked. His voice thundered through the hall. No one takes what's mine. Guards swarmed in, but Lydia held Amara tight, refusing to let go. Whitmore stepped forward, his eyes blazing, his entire body trembling with rage. You'll never survive this. Even if you walk out of here tonight, the world belongs to me. I'll take her back. I always take back what's mine. And then Amara spoke, her voice small but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. I'm not yours. You didn't save me. The eagle did. You just stole me. For a moment silence fell. Even the guards hesitated, unsure. Whitmore's face twisted, the cracks spreading wider. That was when Daniel acted. He had a camera strapped under his jacket, recording everything. Every word, every threat, every confession. He yanked it free and shouted, "It's already streaming. The world can hear you, Whitmore." The billionaire's face went pale. His guards froze, the spell of his power broken by the realization that his secrets were unraveling. Whitmore lunged, but Daniel swung the knife again, forcing him back. Lydia grabbed Amara's hand. Run. They sprinted through the hall, past the guards who no longer dared touch them, past Valor thrashing on the ground and out into the night. By the time the police arrived, real police, not the ones Whitmore owned, the story had already spread online. The video Daniel streamed couldn't be buried, not this time. The world saw the truth. The mask was shattered. But here's the twist. Whitmore disappeared before they could arrest him. His empire crumbled, his properties seized, his staff scattered. But the man himself? Gone. And so was Valor. Lydia rebuilt her life with Amara, scarred but together. Yet some nights, when the wind howled through the trees, Amara swore she could hear wings beating in the dark. And every time Lydia's chest tightened because deep down she knew the truth. Whitmore was still out there. And he wasn't done. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, subscribe and turn on your notifications.